happening since December.
Yeah. All right. So just let it rip. Take it anywhere you want to go. What is happening? What the heck is going on now?
Well, I think we've got about a 10-stage reset. And it started last December. The Fed mentioned that the banks were too big to fail. Then the Fed engineered a fake interest rate hike. It was to distract the morons in the crowd, which make up the majority. There's been no rate hike at all. If anything, it's 5 or 10 basis points. We still have an inversion between the Fed funds and the 3-month Treasury. That should never happen. So that means there was no rate hike. But what they did do, John, was they opened up a second barrel for what I call the double-barreled QE. They opened up the Exchange Stabilization Fund from the Department of Treasury to be the second source of QE, namely covering bond monetization, covering bond sales with monetization. You got countries all around the world now who are dumping their treasuries. Did you notice that in August, September, and October, with China dumping $250 billion in treasuries, did you notice that the interest rate, the bond yield, did not change?
Yes, that was
means
mentioned.
It's a rigged, controlled bond market.
Yeah, doesn't it?
$250 billion was dumped by China after the IMF told them, no, we're not letting you into the special drawing rights basket of the IMF. That's an exclusive club with the dollar, the euro, the British pound, and the Japanese yen. You're not invited. But it might have been a little bit more complicated, like the Chinese had to comply with a few things like internationalization of their capital account, like the Chinese might have had to do a little bit more on the way of accounting standards. But now they're ready, so just to make sure that the U.S. heard them the second time around, they dumped $250 billion. But the point is that the Fed pretended to do a rate hike. And now I think they're taking it back slowly or setting the stage for it slowly. There are a lot of steps to this reset. And I'm coming to learn that there are a lot of gold-backed currencies that are going to be launched probably this year. The U.S. has been dragging its feet with its responsibility. I may have mentioned the last time I was on your show that 2 months before the Ukraine war began, the United States signed on to a global conference pact. And it was one of the main planks of the reset. And we violated the treaty, like we do all the treaties for 250 stinking years. We violated all the NATO treaties for the last 30 stinking years. And we try to blame Russia and make them look like the rogue nation. No. The rogue nation's coming out of Washington.
Yes.
No, so we've got all these different events, and the Ukraine war was a violation of a reset accord, a pact. But now we've run out of time, and we have to comply. We have to join in the process, and the process still has a number of steps left, and one of them is to let the banks go. And that's what Deutsche Bank is doing right now. They're failing. Okay, let me just make a parallel before we go on further. In 2008, well, actually leading up to it in 2005 and 6, many of the Wall Street banks were insolvent because of the mortgage bonds. Not just mortgage bonds, but mortgage obligations, credit portfolios related to home loans. Whatever got securitized ended up in a mortgage bond. Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan were on the verge of dying, so they killed Lehman Brothers and fed off their bones. It should have been a multiple bank failure, but Goldman Sachs controls the U.S. Treasury, and J.P. Morgan pretty much is the officer for the Federal Reserve and liaison to Wall Street. Goldman Sachs had far more losses in the mortgage arena than Lehman Brothers did. But notice that Lehman Brothers was given 100 cents on the dollar for all the bond insurance contracts, and everybody else got 35 or 60 cents. So Lehman Brothers was killed. All right, what Lehman Brothers was in 2008, Deutsche Bank is now in 2016. And it really started for Deutsche Bank in 2014 or so, maybe even earlier. But they've just been extending this. What Lehman was to the U.S. banking system, Deutsche Bank is to the entire Western banking system. What Lehman Brothers was is an example of the mortgage bond failure. What Deutsche Bank is a representation of uniform failure in every single banking sector, banking niche. I'm talking about mortgages, currencies, LIBOR interest rate, gold, derivatives like the interest rate swaps. And Deutsche Bank has a rather heavy involvement in the Russian mafia investments.
Oh.
And that's what at least 2 of the London banker murders were about, concealing Deutsche Bank's involvement with the Russian mafia.
It does not surprise me at all.
Well, it's been kept rather quiet, and notice in the last year we've had no more bankers in London taking flying lessons without a parachute.
Yeah, how about that? I guess everybody just decided to jump off the roof at the same time? No?
I think the focus now is on the survival, and they got rid of a number of mid-level mules. Most of the J.P. Morgan deaths, murders, flying lessons, call it whatever you want, they're thrown out of windows. Most of those deaths for the J.P. Morgan staff were to people who were about to reveal the size of the J.P. Morgan derivative losses in the multiple trillions. And they wanted to keep it quiet. Mm-hmm. I can't blame them for wanting to keep it quiet. So what's wrong with killing a few people?
Wow, man.
I mean, people die all the time. You got people dying in Iraq. You got people dying in Afghanistan and Syria and Yemen. What's the big deal? A few bankers are killed. What's the big deal, John?
Yeah, and it's funny. The reports were there, but there wasn't anything else. I think sometimes people are so horrified about what they really believe to be the straight story that they just go, I'm going to use that word again, they just go into denial. The whole thing looked funny. I mean, what are the chances of this many people just deciding, oh, my bank job is too stressful, I think I'll jump off the roof of the building or out the window or whatever? Crazy.
Well, the news gave you a reason, personal distress, their family, their marriage, their job, their income is reduced, so they took a flying lesson but forgot their parachute. Mm-hmm. It happens all the time. I mean, I don't know what the big deal is. People die all the time.
Yeah.
I just wish the bad guys would do more dying.
Yeah, well, that's the way it is. In any war, it's always the wrong people that get killed, right?
Yeah, well, I was 19 when Vietnam was ending, fortunately, and I had a good lesson on how the older people are involved in Senate kickbacks with defense contracts and maybe start up a little Air America heroin business. And what the heck? Let's send out bunches of kids between 19 and 28 years old, and if they die, it's no big deal. I got a real rough lesson. My father went through World War II. I call it the Noble War. I went through Vietnam. It's anything but a noble war. So I had my lesson, and anyway, we're getting a little off track here, but there's a lot of distractions going on, John, about what is happening. And the distractions are all over the place, but one of the very interesting lessons to learn, to take away in the first 2 months of the year here, is that most asset classes are doing very badly, but gold is not. And the reason is simple, because the gold standard is coming back, and Americans are going to be the last ones to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And when gold goes up, it takes silver with it. It usually, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. This time I have a regular saying that I've been telling clients for the last few years. Whatever percentage gain that gold has off the bottom, silver will offer triple that percentage gain. I think we're going to see 10,000 gold. I think we're going to see 400 silver. But before we get there, we've got to see 3,000 gold, and we must see 100 silver. But we're going to get there, and it's going to be really easy because a new financial structure is coming. It's going to recapitalize the banks. A new currency system is coming. It's going to be all gold-backed. You know, I got some clients who say, gosh, Jim, you know, we've tried everything. I said, no, we haven't. We haven't tried liquidating the big banks and offering a gold standard for currency and trade and banking. Oh, that. Yeah, oh, that. The solution. Yes, that.
Yeah.
We have not liquidated the big banks. We've stuffed trillions of phony money into their coffers, redeeming their toxic bonds. In fact, you could say that QE is the biggest backdoor Wall Street bank bailout in modern history. It's the biggest bank backdoor bailout in modern history. It's not the least bit honest, even as to what they're doing. So we haven't tried everything. We haven't done gold trade notes for payment on shipping, and as a result, there's, I believe, to some extent, it's not really confirmed, but to some extent, there's a global shipping strike going on. And you see it evident in the Baltic Dry Index. It's down over 80%. That's the amount of money that costs to pay for a ship to, you know, bring in 1,800 containers to Los Angeles from Asia. It costs less to rent a ship than it does to rent a Lamborghini. That's how messed up the shipping is. I think there's a strike going on. They don't want the dollar anymore. Why should they? We're printing it. Why should they? We're doing it backroom deals, bailing out Wall Street banks. Why should they? The Fed just issued in 2009 $23 trillion in near 0% loans to the owners of the Federal Reserve. This is called self-dealing corruption at a gigantic scale. So nations of the world don't want the dollar anymore. The Americans are the last ones to discover this. I have a favorite challenge that I offer, John.
Yeah.
I'll tell you where I've used it. One guy said to me, Jim, we've got a lot of savings. I have a fiance, and my wife to be refuses to put a large chunk of our savings into a gold account. She wants to buy a house instead, and in fact she wants a rather large one. And I said, okay, here's a question to ask her. This is kind of a qualification test for whether the person is ready and able to make any kind of important financial decision. What are the differences between gold? I'm sorry, I blew it. What are the differences between the dollar, money, and legal tender? And when I asked my father that 2 years ago, I got a snappy, sarcastic answer back, and he said, well, Jim, that's a really arrogant thing to say. Obviously, money is what I have in my wallet. And I said, Dad, obviously that is not money. That is legal tender. Yeah. And you failed on as soon as you opened your mouth. So people need to understand that legal tender is what the government declares as ready and useful and viable for satisfying debts and transactions, public and private. The dollar is merely denominated coupons of U.S. government debt. And money is something very different. Money must satisfy certain criteria of being easily exchanged, like fungible, recognized around the world, easily transported, and a few other things, including the climax, and not subject to alchemy and production. In other words, like the Fed's electronic bits that they call money. That's not money. That's the dollar. And it's corrupted to the core. There's only one substance known in the world that survives the test of time, like, Whoops, I lost my gold treasure. I think it's under the ocean somewhere. And then later you find it a century later, and all's well. Now try that with money. Try that with the dollar, rather. Try that with something like a debt certificate from a Wall Street bank. It doesn't work. So only gold satisfies the criteria for money. So people need to understand that the dollar is declared legal tender in the United States. It's actually legal tender in Panama and Ecuador and a few other places. But it's going to go away, John, because we've made it toxic. We did not do the right thing in 2007 and 8. We did not liquidate the banks. We did not go back to the gold standard. Instead, we elevated the Fed's balance sheet from $1 trillion to about, it's close to 5 now, $4.5 trillion or $4.7 trillion. It's full of toxic bonds and crapola. So we have not done the right thing, and now the world is forcing the U.S. to do the right thing amidst a lot of other contractual dealings where the U.S. has made sure that there are plenty of murders of all the lawyers and players involved. But we're being forced now with the reset. The reset is a kind of a nice word for reinstalling the gold standard globally with full resistance by Washington. But it's going to happen, and the longer they delay, the worse it'll be for the Americans. The shock that the Americans are going to have is that if we don't have a gold-backed currency, and it's looking like it's going to be a real major challenge for that. If we don't have a gold-backed currency, we're going to get severe price inflation for everything that's imported. We're going to have supply shortages, and we're going to have a lot of disorder, chaos, and violence. I'm hearing that the U.S. is negotiating right now, I mean like this week, for the Chinese to lend them on a giant lease some gold to back a new currency. But the U.S. will not be the custodian of this gold because they're not to be trusted. The elite in the United States stole the gold in Fort Knox. They stole the gold in Libya. They stole the gold in Ukraine. They forced the Canadians to divulge, divest their gold, dishoard, sell. And now the Canadians have sold their last $200 million worth of gold like absolute idiots, following the fascist trail. But the U.S. is going to have to be, I think, a colony of China in order to get out of this and to avoid serious plight of the third world. The Chinese just might lease them some gold, but again, the U.S. cannot be trusted, so it won't be held in the U.S. soil. It'll be held somewhere else.
Jim, let me ask you something. This going on with what do you make of this guy, Larry Summers, and his call to get rid of the $100 bill? And while his buddies in Europe are talking about killing the 500 euro bill, and then pointing to Luxembourg saying, oh, well, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but not much. This country is notorious for being friendly to tax evaders and blah, 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 blah. And then you read that story. Larry Summers is like, nah, this just needs to go away. We ought to look at the $50 bill, too. And then you go to another story, and it's talking about, hey, at some of the big banks, and there's a big Chase ATM, a big Chase logo next to an ATM. It's like you can use your smartphone instead of your bank card to withdraw money from your account. I'm going, they're pushing for digital currency as hard as they can because it'll make taxing people and stealing people's money and just cutting people off from their money, rendering them completely helpless. It'll make it, so much easier. I mean, am I dreaming or is this really happening?
Well, you're dreaming of its possibility and what the nightmare would entail, but I don't think it's going to happen.
You don't?
There's a really good way of perceiving the current problems and the potential solutions. Look at the problem, listen to what Washington has to say, and their many, many henchmen, and then ignore it because they're not in control anymore. Since when does Larry Summers have any power over anything? except maybe his bathroom habits.
Yeah.
Okay,
Maybe.
this is a former Treasury Department head in the U.S. government. He later, after really having an unspectacular and uninteresting career as Treasury Secretary, he went on to be Harvard's president, where he was universally hated, and he presided over a period where they lost about $3 or $4 billion to the Harvard Endowment Fund through derivatives and other related risky crapola that belongs in the bathroom. So Larry Summers, in my view, is a screw-up ne'er-do-well. So if he talks about eliminating the $100 bill, I laugh and say, well, gee, Larry, where are you working these days? Are you in some kind of a think tank, earning money, spouting propaganda, or do you have a real job? The answer is no, he does not have a real job. So I don't give a hoot what he has to say. Here's some reasons why we'll never go to a cashless society. And you're right, a cashless society is designed to be an ultimate fascist system where the what do you want to call them? The villain? No, the rebels. The rebels and the people who really shake the boat, they can just be cut off so they can't buy milk and bread anymore. Yeah, okay, that sounds like a really good motive. Here are the reasons why the cashless society will never come about. You would not be able to bribe politicians.
Wow, that is genius, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you wouldn't be able to have sports betting to keep it quiet from your wife. You wouldn't be able to buy cocaine on Wall Street. That's what they have for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't be able to fence stolen goods. So that'll make really angry a lot of people in the mafia. You wouldn't be able to do prostitution. Again, the mafia would be very upset. And so would a lot of the people in Costa Rica. And the best of all is you'd eliminate the entire black market, which is for border smuggling and for currency trade, like in Venezuela, where they set a ridiculous value of the Bolivar currency. The real market is the black market. No, these are all reasons why the cashless society is a joke. It's a joke. I laugh.
Really?
Yeah. What's your next act? You got some balls you're going to juggle in the air? These are people out of work making policy statements without an office. And there's another angle to this. They might want to eliminate a lot of $100 bills, but that would mean the only people who own them would be the CIA from their drug running. They've got entire containers of shrink-wrapped $100 bills sitting in Greek ports. No, this is all silly talk. Let's not waste any more time on the topic, if you don't mind.
No, it's okay with me. That you know what you're I believe you have the distinction of being the first and only one we've spoken to who said, "Forget about it." What are you trying to do? What do you think they're going to take away the mechanism to move graft around? That's good. That's real good.
Well, they can't pay politicians. Well, how are they going to pay politicians? You can always give them a gift of something like a diamond, and they can sell it later, but they're going to have to justify where they got it later.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if gold
it's
coins.
One of the topics that rubs me the wrong way.
Oh, it's all right. It's good. It's okay. Good. All right. Now, stolen oil out of Syria and collapsing oil prices at the consumer level. What does it all mean, oh golden jackass?
Well, Syria is nothing like what the U.S. news describes it to be.
Yeah.
Syria has a number of different aspects and sides to it. I like to point to the biggest first. Syria is where the Iranian gas pipeline would meet the Mediterranean ports, hit the valves, join the Gazprom system, and supply Western Europe. So let's interrupt it. That's the American, that's the Washington thinking by the neocons who have perfect record in war, and more war. Does anybody realize that the only group in the Obama administration that did not change was the neocons in the State Department from the Bush II administration?
That's very interesting, isn't it?
To me, it's natural. I expected it before Obama even named his people. They might be different people, but they're from the same club, and they take the same orders. They take the orders from the same people. Okay, Syria is about blocking the Iranian gas pipeline because the Saudis don't want it and the Americans don't want it. The Saudis and the other Gulf Emirates like Qatar, Oman, they have big gas facilities, and they would rather supply Europe with twice the price of LNG.
Yeah.
They don't want the Iranians to come in there and take their market share away. Now, there's another side to it. I got to explain something that came from my very great source. I call him Cato. He's my military source. He's a great guy. He's very entertaining. But he told me 2 years ago, this was in 2014, early in the year, he said there's going to come a day, and it won't be very long, where the U.S. Pentagon regular military is going to encounter a hot war facing and killing the mercenaries hired by Langley, the other American military. And it began in Syria months ago and is now actually in the news, where the Pentagon is a little bit, how should I say, befuddled.
Yes.
What do? We're killing mercenaries paid by Langley and their drug money. The mercenaries called ISIS are a creation of the Saudi Arabians, the United States, England, and Israel. They're paid for by narcotics money. Russia is cutting that off. So we come up with a lot of propaganda that Russia is bombing villages. No, the U.S. is bombing villages.
Yes.
We've always been bombing villages. We've been bombing villages for years and years and years, going back way before the Iraq War. We bombed villages in Pakistan for the last several years. We bomb villages and claim that the civilian deaths are okay because they might grow up to be terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
That's a new CIA plank. Civilian deaths are okay if they might become terrorists in the future. And there was actually a movie by Ethan Hawke and a couple other people. That was out a few months ago. And it was about the turn of priorities in the Las Vegas, Nevada trailer court that had all the different drone control mechanisms and all that machinery, all that electronics. And the whole staff had to begin to change their way of thinking because, wait a minute, we were killing bad guys before. Now we're killing a whole funeral party because there might be a bad guy in there. Oh, that's okay. The rest might grow up to be terrorists. Whoa. Okay, so anyway, Syria is a lot more than just an ISIS playground. The United States wants a location of permanent war. And we've already got one in Ukraine. We want a second one in Syria.
Oh.
When they talk about upending and what do you call it, ousting King Assad, when they call him President Assad, I giggle. He's a king who decided to change his name to president, rig elections, and call himself president, and maybe wear different clothes. But he's still the king. There's a lot going on in Syria. They want a permanent war. I mean, this is straight out of George Orwell, 1984. We're trying to disrupt the movement of Eurasia to displace the power of Oceania. Oceania is Anglo-American power. Combine it with Australia, however you want to look at it. We're trying to block the rise of the Eurasian trade zone. Now that is Russia, China, and perhaps Central Europe, joining with all the former Soviet republics, and maybe a little bit of Western Asia, like the Caucasus and all those little oil countries down there. George Orwell talked about this. George Orwell was very well connected. He knew his British connections, and they talked about how the objective was to keep Europe in a constant state of division. Can you say World War II?
Yeah.
World War II has another interpretation. I'm just gonna throw it on the table for you and your listeners to digest. France and England leased a tremendous amount of Russian Tsarist gold around 1900 to 1910. I'm thinking on the order of 15,000 tons of gold to keep it in safe place, because the Tsar was sensing a rise of Bolshevism, which we've now come to learn was a Rothschild project. So Rothschild stirred up the Bolshevik Revolution and convinced the Tsar of Russia from the Romanov family to lease his gold to France and Germany, and then they killed him.
Mm-hmm.
And installed the Soviet Union. And I've got a quote that I put in the, I believe it was the December newsletter. It was from Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn claims that the Communist Party leaders were not Russian. He claims that they were from Western Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Central Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So not only was Rothschild a genius in creating the Bolshevik Revolution, bringing in Lenin and Trotsky, Leon Trotsky, but he also funded the Nazi Revolution in Germany with its own intellectuals. So Rothschild started World War II. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he paid for the murder of the Archduke in Austro-Hungary. This Rothschild family is now being unmasked. They're a bunch of Satanists hiding in the synagogue. That's a very profound statement.
It's been
they
coming
are
up.
not of that faith. They are Satanists.
Yep, it's been coming up more and more.
Synagogue.
Yep. Keep rolling, man. This is good.
So, we basically stole, let's say, 15,000 tons of Russian gold and covered it up with a war, a very big war, where, 50 million Russians died?
Yeah.
There's even debate as to whether, Stalin. There's debate as to whether Stalin was pure Russian either. Okay, so we stole the gold, and we still have not returned the Russian gold. So, when Putin came to power, and I don't really care about changing the rules so he can become president a second time. I don't really care. I don't care. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt did it. We don't really call him a bad guy. But Putin changed the rules, became president again, and then kicked out the Rothschild bankers. Next thing you know, we have a Ukraine war.
Yeah.
So the Rothschilds started the Ukraine war as retribution to the Kremlin for having thrown out the central banker controllers for the Russian banking and ruble currency system. Can anybody see what's going on? The wars are to protect the Rothschild system and to prevent the unity of Russia with Central Europe, in particular the German marriage. So the Rothschilds bring about the European Union Commission, an unelected bunch of fascists who happen to be pedophiles at the same time. And they're unelected, and they're trying to get a trade pact, even though dozens of cities across Europe have demonstrations with well over 100,000 people against the new U.S.-led fascist trade unions. Now, these same European Union commissioners ordered the Russian sanctions, and I think they're trying to destroy the European economy. Because what better fertile ground to install a totalitarian state in Europe than a destroyed economy? We're the bad guys.
Always.
The U.S. and its neocons are the bad guys, and we need to throw them out. They're in charge of the Wall Street banks, which happened to give giant loans to Nazi Germany during the war. And then we brought in, after World War II was over, we brought in 2,000 very skilled, qualified Nazis, forgiving them for their sins by saying that they exercised bad judgment. We know about Werner von Braun. What we don't remember is, what we're not told well, is that Joseph Mengele was one of them.
Yeah.
And he's in charge of the Langley MLK Ultra. I'm sorry, not MLK. That's Martin Luther King. The
first black man on the moon. Right. I know him. Martin Luther King.
MK Ultra robot program. Joseph Mengele set up all the protocol for the torture and robots. And if you don't think the torture robots are all over the place, then you need to look no further than Britney Spears, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, Lady Gaga, Madonna, and a few others like Johnny Depp. Britney Spears, when she cut off all her hair, she was asked, "What on earth are you doing?" And she said, "I get so tired of them sticking needles in me." This is for the rape sessions after giving her amnesia drugs according to the Mengele protocol. All right, I'm getting a little bit off track here, John, but we're going to see new currency coming, gold-backed currencies. There's an enormous amount of gold out there, and right now they're trying to get treaties signed and everything lined up for the new currencies to have proper backing with some of the existing bonds. They call them legacy bonds that actually have gold behind them within the contracts. If you buy a U.S. Treasury right now, you're not a bond. You're not buying any gold. But if you bought a 1920 U.S. Treasury bond, you did buy gold. So U.S. is trying to renege on all these old bonds, trying to murder the lawyers, trying to murder all the other representatives coming before the courts. The judges are under a lot of pressure. They are under pressure being murdered for making proper judgments and rulings. So the U.S. is being outed as a rogue nation, and we've got to be careful because if the sequence happens according to my darker path, the U.S. is going to be under new colonization. Sorry about this. I live near a boulevard.
Yeah.
The U.S. is going to undergo reindustrialization and colonization where most of the companies are going to be owned by foreigners. And you can't really say exactly how it's going to turn out. We've got a long way to go. But right now, if you take a look at some of the details, like the free trade zones in many, many states, like over 40 states, you'll see that a lot of different companies are Chinese-owned. And I featured a couple in November and December, like a little copper tubing company in Alabama. They received some grants from the government in Alabama. They received some lenient tax treatment for, say, corporate earnings. They got some other, land grants and, low property taxes. We're not talking about forever, but for a couple of years while they start up. And now this one copper tubing plant in Alabama has about 200 people employed. They weren't employed before. The U.S. companies are folding because most everything in U.S. American business is under tremendous distress. And the distress comes from many sides, including the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, where they're printing money to cover the government debt and forcing a lot of investors to invest in tangible goods, and that's raising the cost structure. the raised cost structure for American businesses results in a smaller profit margin, and the end result is that businesses shut down. Okay, so the Alabama copper tubing business is hiring Americans, but here's the key. When foreigners own American businesses, roughly 1/3 of the output from the business goes to China. And this is how the U.S. is going to work feverishly to close its trade gap. I'll make you a bet that 90% of Americans couldn't come anywhere near a proper guess of what the U.S. trade deficit is annually.
I'll bet that's right.
I bet you they couldn't even define it. It's about $500 billion a year, about $40 billion a month.
Wow.
So if you combine the federal deficit of $1 trillion plus the $500 billion of trade deficit, the U.S. must close $1.5 trillion a year in deficits or else face tremendous loss of whatever they collateralize their currency with. And if they can't collateralize their currency, like a gold backing or, say, copper plate backing or something tangible, copper, silver, gold combination, if they can't back the currency that's coming for the United States, then it's going to be devalued every 2 months, and we're going to end up looking like Venezuela. Venezuela in 2000 and I think it was 13 suffered back-to-back 35-40% devaluations. They had suddenly a 74% devaluation of their bolivar currency, and they had to desperately close the deficit. So how does Venezuela, why do I mention Venezuela? Because U.S. might end up in the same way. Venezuela is exporting their rice, exporting their beans, exporting their toilet paper, exporting their condoms in order to close the deficit and stop the bleeding on their currency, and it's just not working. They have 300% inflation in just the last 3 years.
Just saw an article about how there are food shortages down there. It's because they're exporting their food to cover their debt?
That's correct, yes.
Oh my
it's not from bad farming. It's exports. When you have, the U.S. covers its debt by pointing howitzer turrets at our allies and say, buy U.S. Treasury bonds. That's how we cover our debts. It's a little oversimplified, but it's not far off, because in 2005, South Korea announced that they wanted to diversify out of Treasury bonds because they thought they had too many in their banking system reserves, and the U.S. Navy conducted naval exercises off the Seoul, South Korean coast the next week. So Koreans changed their minds. We're going to have reality come with the reset, John, and it's going to be a huge wake-up call to the American people. They're going to see some new employment opportunities, but it might help to speak Chinese.
Wow, man, that's extraordinary. I'll tell you what, why don't we pause for just a minute, Jim? You know, I keep making these noises like, but I'm thinking, that's not a negative noise. That's an aha noise without actually saying it, which I just did. But good grief, man. It's so refreshing. This is what I love about this. What I love about it is not necessarily the gravity of the news, except that now we're actually getting it. Because I'm telling you, people, and this is just this phrase is just worn out. I'm going to use it one more time, maybe a few more over the course of the next few years. But people are just so dumbed down. They just don't know what's happening to them. They don't know what any of it really means. And when you get on and it takes a minute. You're a little bit like me. It takes a minute to get all 12 firing. But once all your cylinders start firing, I got to tell you something. I feel better because I start to get it. That dot connecting thing that we heard about earlier before you came on. It's like, yeah, connect the dots. You can connect them. Well, I can't see any dots. So thanks for putting some up on up on the
Well,
canvas
John, I think
there.
it's actually a little worse than what you described. Many Americans can't grasp what's happening. They don't perhaps have the intellectual firepower.
Yeah.
They don't have training. And even the economists don't understand. I've got into arguments with economists, PhD economists. It's really quite funny. I have a PhD in statistics, but my bio says something rather clever. It says, I am unencumbered by the limitations of economics credentials.
Oh, you
In
mean
other words, I wasn't badly educated.
Yeah. You're actually a doctor who doesn't have to worry about what all the other doctors are worried about. You just go ahead and apply new techniques and actually heal your patients. Is that what you're saying?
What? Yeah. But of the American public, I think you could put a small percentage, like 10%. They get it. They understand this is really bad.
Yes, they do.
This is bad, but they may not have all the details, except those who subscribe to the Hat-Trick Letter. All right, then you can divide the 90% into two groups. Half of them just don't have the intellectual ability. I mean, uneducated, and they're worried about the next meal and whether the old lady's going to be available on Saturday night. The other half, they don't want to know. They're full of denial in a different way. Oh yeah, I know that's true, but I just don't want to. I don't want to talk about that. That's very upsetting. I enjoy sleeping well, Jim. Why do you upset me?
Yeah.
I hear it a lot, John. I think it's half and half. Half ignorance and half just don't want to know. Like my sister, I get under her. I get on her nerves by saying, well, you can continue to stick your head in the sand. No, Jim, I'm not sticking my head in the sand. I say, well, why is it you never want to talk to me about any of this? Well, because it's very upsetting. So are you taking any action to protect yourself and your 7-figure private pension fund after these 28 years in a law firm as partner? Are you protecting your life savings? Well, I just hope it doesn't happen. I'm sick of this. This is all denial crap. They don't want to know. My sister actually says to me, the less I talk to you, the better I sleep.
The less I talk to you, the better I sleep.
Yes.
Oh.
I told my brother, who was Phi Beta Kappa, economics degree from a strong Big Ten school, Phi Beta Kappa economics. I said to him, John, people really need to get their money out of bank accounts and stock accounts and put it into something really, really well protected. What is there, Jim? And I said, John, you went to law school. You were on law review. Do you know anything about what money is? It's gold and silver. Oh, that. Wow. I don't want to talk about all that, Jim. I get tired of that. My brother doesn't say the less I talk to you, the better I sleep. My brother says, I try not to talk to you.
Wow.
Because I have better peace of mind. I'm busy. Why do you want to disrupt what I'm doing? I'm enjoying my life. I try not to talk to you, Jim. That's why I don't answer your emails. I say, yeah, well, you do answer 2 or 3 every decade.
This thing in the Middle East is very disturbing. Do you find it interesting that Trump says, if I'm elected president, you're going to find out who brought those towers down. You may find out it's the Saudis. And not even a week later, the Saudis announced they have a nuclear weapon.
It's all distraction, John. I don't understand why people don't get it. It was a Bush family. It was a gold heist. They stole the gold in the World Trade Center. Most Americans are so dumb, they don't even know the World Trade Center was the biggest private bank in the world. They don't even know what the World Trade Center is.
Are you calling me a dumbass? I didn't know it was the biggest bank in the world.
Well, now you do.
Yes, I'm less of a dumbass now. All right, good. I like that.
$100 billion worth of gold bars. And the hint was given by Hollywood a few years before 2001 with the Bruce Willis movie. What was it? Hard to Kill?
Yeah, Die Hard.
Starring Jeremy Irons as the ringleader of the theft of the gold of the Federal Reserve, with the underground tunnels and the 23 trucks.
Yes.
That's exactly what it was. They stole the gold, $100 billion worth of gold from the World Trade Center, biggest private bank in the world, plus $100 billion in bearer bonds, plus $100 billion in diamonds.
Wow.
And Americans just cannot seem to get their grip on this story. It's amazing. Only about 30 or 40% of Americans have any inkling of what happened. Okay, the Saudis didn't have anything to do with it. They're the fall guys. Okay, here's just a funny little fact. We're told that these 4 or 5 young Arab kids, in their 20s, 30 years old, had trouble with flying Cessnas, twin-engine Cessnas, yet they were able to fly the commercial aircraft after hijacking them with box cutters.
Yeah.
I mean, the story gets stupider as you get deeper.
Oh, yeah.
All right, here's the funny fact. I've talked with a few pilots. One of my good buddies here in Costa Rica is an ex-U.S. Air Force pilot and an ex-airline pilot for 15 years, commercial airline pilot. And he said, Jim, there's a simulation that is given to a test given to commercial professional pilots. Turn off the beacon system and try to fly into the World Trade Center buildings. Take a guess, John, what percentage of professional commercial airline pilots successfully fly into the World Trade Center buildings?
0.
3.
Really? No kidding. That many?
3%.
Oh, 3%.
Okay, so
wow.
the Saudis do possess a nuclear bomb. Okay, fine. Has nothing to do with 9/11. Okay, here's the real story of 9/11. Here's the real story of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the principal oil exporter for 40-some years, right?
Yes.
And they've been backing the dollar with treasury bond purchases, right?
Yes.
Do you think they own a truckload or a boatload of treasury bonds?
Yes.
Yeah. They own between $3 and $5 trillion worth of treasury bonds, about half of the foreign-held debt from the United States government debt. So, U.S. is now leading them on a path of self-destruction so that we can expunge the $5 trillion in debt. This is not complicated.
That's unbelievable, man.
You got to think like a criminal if you want to understand what's going on, because that's all we have running the U.S. government. They're fascist. They're bank criminals. We've had $280 billion in settlements from bond and investment fraud since Lehman for just the Wall Street banks. Not one felony charge conviction, not one prison sentence for not one executive. They're criminals. All right, so we're letting the Saudis buy a lot of U.S.-made military equipment for their stupid war in Yemen that they're losing. We encourage them to buy a lot of weapons and supply ISIS. One of the funniest stories regarding ISIS was I think it was a plumbing company in Texas. They traded in a pickup truck, like, a Toyota pickup truck or a Ford pickup truck. I can't remember what it was. I think it was a Toyota. And on the side of the traded in pickup truck was this guy's plumbing company sign. And he realizes, oh my gosh, look at that. They're showing a bunch of ISIS trucks in Syria loaded with machine guns in the back. And then there's my plumbing company. These are supplied by the U.S. to ISIS, so we're leading Saudi down a different garden path as well in Syria, guaranteeing that they're going to have a fallen regime in the next, I think several months. And on top of that, King Salman is kind of the runt of the litter. You had Fahd and Abdullah, and now you've got the senile Salman is king. He's talking about appointing his son, the 31-year-old Mohammed bin Salman. Think about calling him king now, and all the other ones, all the other princes are hopping mad. No, that's not going to happen here. So we're about to have a local palace coup while they're losing the war in Yemen, losing the war with ISIS in Syria, and the idiots in Riyadh have just announced that they're going to supply a 350,000 man force to invade Iraq and Syria. And when the U.S. said, well, we're not going to back you, oops, the Saudis said, well, we're not quite ready for that. No, we're leading them into a failed state. And when that happens, the underpinning for the Department of Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund, which is $3 or $5 trillion worth of Saudi bonds, will be confiscated, will be expunged. It'll become U.S. property because no one will give a damn. The Saudis are history. They're back to a Bedouin society fighting over the goats and figs.
And figs.
Right. They're going back to a Bedouin society of goats and figs. So, I'm told there's only going to be one Arab oil monarchy standing in the next year or two, and that's Oman.
Really?
UAE is going to fall. I think Qatar might survive. The voice says, I don't know, Jim. I think only Oman has made the right decisions. No, Qatar has made some really good decisions with LNG, liquefied natural gas, made contracts with European provision, supplying to Europe, has made deals with technology sharing with Russia. Russia's not going to topple them. Russia is toppling the Saudi kingdom right now. Right now. Russia and Iran are on the other side in Yemen. And they're kicking Saudi butt.
Yes.
While the Saudis are being charged with war crimes. Bombing hospitals, bombing schools, bombing marketplaces. Where'd they learn that? From the U.S. military. That's what we've been doing in Syria. We call them ISIS strongholds, terrorist locations.
Yes.
Really? I didn't know the Aleppo, largest city in Syria, outside of Damascus, I didn't know the Aleppo electricity generating station was a terrorist outpost. No. Now, in the next year or two, we're going to have a lot of revelations, and I'm really looking forward to the revelations. I'm not talking about biblical. I'm talking about just revelations like, who did 9/11? Well, it was the Bush family. I mean, take a look no further than who had the electricity contractor position for the World Trade Center. It was Papa Bush's oldest son. He had all the opportunity in the middle of the night to set the demolition charges. Charlie Sheen was right all this time. He may be a drunk and a half-wit and kind of a weird guy, but so what? He was right. Now, the 9/11 events. I mean, take a look at the Pentagon. My gosh, I bumped in Nicaragua in a bar. I bumped into a professional commercial airline pilot who said to me that the hole in the Pentagon was caused by the front nose of the commercial plane cutting the hole, and then the wings folded and went inside the hole. And I said to him, he was a little drunk at the time, I said, you might possibly be the dumbest guy I've met in Central America from the United States. And he said, what? Those are fighting words. I said, Standing right here. I'm not going anywhere. He said, well, those are fighting words. I said, hey, I call a spade a spade. You're an idiot. He said, come on, you're just joking around. I said, no, I'm not joking. You're an idiot. What is your educational background? Civil engineering. I said, then you're a double idiot. No, take a look at the hole, and it's precisely the hole a cruise missile makes. There's no debris in the Pentagon lawn. And you look at every site where there's a commercial crash, and you see seats, cushions, engine parts, fuselage fragments, and pieces of human bodies. There's none of that at the Pentagon. Ian McIntyre of CNN got it right. He said a missile just hit the Pentagon. We're seeking further information. He was taken off the site. The next day, CNN said a commercial airline hit the Pentagon. One of the stupidest stories ever to hit the American news. Swallowed hook, line, and sinker by the morons in the U.S. population. 90% of the population I consider to be morons. Educated morons and uneducated morons. The 10% of the U.S. population, the 33 million, they're the ones I appeal to subscribe to the Hetrick letter. The rest, you're lost. You're either too stupid or too stuck in denial, not wishing to disturb your peace of mind. I'm not interested in you. And I don't think they're listening to this show. So it's the other people who don't listen to your show. 9/11 was an inside job. That news is going to come out. In fact, Russian President Putin has a lot of information about that from satellite telemetry, intercepted communications. I have my own information. I've got one story that's just hair-curling. It's from a subscriber who attended a dinner with a woman who attended a dinner with 3 of her college buddies. And it was in 2002. And the woman said, one of our buddies, let's just call her Elaine. Elaine went off to the ladies' room. And she didn't come back for a while. So someone else went after her to say, what's going on? How are you doing? And she was vomiting. Because she was an air traffic controller out of Dulles Airport, Dulles Airport in Washington. And she was tracking the U.S. Air Force, their planes that shot down the Shanksville airliner. And she got a visit that day, or that week, from the CIA forcing her to sign a loyalty oath, not to reveal the information that she had regarding the U.S. Air Force shooting down the Shanksville plane, or else she would lose her citizenship, lose her Social Security benefits, lose her job, and lose her passport, become a non-citizen on the no-fly list. That was the good buddy of one of my subscribers. Got another subscriber who was from the same group. She said, that was my buddy Elaine, but I got my own story. My father was in Pearl Harbor in Army intelligence, and he discovered that we opened the door for Pearl Harbor, inviting the attack because Roosevelt could not get the nation to sign up for a good war. And my father, she said, was hunted for 10 years, and he hid in the hills of Hawaii until finally he was told, no big deal, it's all over, 10 years have passed, no one will believe you anyway.
Why does this not surprise me? I was reading some letters that my dad sent back in October and November of 41. My cousin delivered them to me. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, what a rich trove of history. And I'll just say that even in November he was talking about this war that's coming. And he also made mention that the ships were only going out for a couple of weeks, and then they'd come back in, then they'd go for a couple of weeks, then they'd go back out for a couple of weeks. He goes, but no longer than that. So that was, in my opinion, that regularity was set up to make sure that the carriers were out when the attack came, so that we didn't lose absolutely everything, but we lost enough to justify going full bore into war with Japan.
Oh, the end of the war. Let's get both the bookends on this war.
Yeah.
The end of the war, we had the Nagasaki and Hiroshima nuclear bombs.
Yeah.
There was motive for that. The Chinese government refused to reveal the location of 100,000 tons of gold hidden in the Philippine hills. So we thought, well, let's drop a couple bombs on them. Maybe we can soften them up so they can tell us where the gold is.
Did it work?
Nah.
Mm-hmm.
No, we had to kill Marcos.
No
All
kidding.
we remember of Marcos is his wife had a lot of shoes.
That's pretty much it, yeah.
They created a gigantic, I'm told, the size of 4 football fields full of gold bars chest high on pallets in the hills. And when the construction crews were done creating the vaults, they were all murdered by the U.S. and the Japanese. There's a lot of ugly stuff. Most of the wars that we have out there now, John, are either to block big trade unions from forming or to steal gold. By the way, I've seen some pictures and a forensic report that Muammar Gaddafi is not dead. This could come out soon. They killed one of his doubles.
Oh my God, this just gets deeper and deeper. Jim, seriously.
Gaddafi has not some birth defects, but he has some marks. You know, I've got a mark on the right side of my neck. My mother has the same thing. It's a big, big mole, half an inch in diameter. Fine. I got a big scar on the right side of my jaw from an incident when I was 6 years old in Mississippi. I fell in a swimming pool. Okay, fine. I got knee surgery on the left side, a big titanium screw on my left knee. Okay, bodies have these markings. So does Gaddafi. The dead body has the markings of one of his doubles, and they know his name. Gaddafi's going to come back and demand the gold to be returned from the British thieves running their banks. 143 tons of gold. He wants their nation's gold back. And he wants to create an Arab dinar so the Arab nations can have a gold currency too. I mean, there's more to it. Maybe it's not quite as legitimate for the Arab dinar. I don't know. It's very difficult for the Arabs to get together and agree on anything. I have a joke that they have OPEC meetings now, but they can't agree on the color of the name tags or the lunch menu, so they adjourn. But the OPEC meetings have another purpose, and that's why they love going to Vienna, because they've got tremendous prostitutes. Arabs like go to Vienna.
Wow. It all comes down to just a few things, doesn't it?
Well, it comes down to gold, breaking trade units, and nice women. I mean, I used to love the show MASH with Alan Alda and all them.
Yeah.
There was one show when they said, "What are we fighting for?" And Alan Alda concluded by the end of the show, "Better quality toilets."
Yes.
I mean, we're going to see a lot of revelations this year, John, and I'm very excited about it. I want to see the Bush family. By the way, why did Jeb Bush back out of the presidential race? Because he was embarrassed by Trump's accusation? "I don't like the way you're criticizing my mother." No, I don't think that was really it. I think it was, I don't want to be in line of power, in the spotlight, when it comes out that my father, George H.W. Bush, was a main player in the 9/11 incidents. Furthermore, and this is kind of weird and funny, when Russia started attacking the ISIS strongholds in Syria, he decided that he was going to interrupt their heroin supply chain as well, because that's how the U.S., Israel, and Britain are paying the mercenary guerrillas of ISIS. You call it whatever you want. I call it ISIS because people know what I'm talking about. It goes by ISIL, goes by Levant, goes by Daesh, goes by a lot of names. Let's just call it ISIS. Russia military interrupted the heroin supply chain for Syria, which was being used for paying the mercenaries. But he also interrupted the Bush-Saudi channel of heroin from more southern points in the Middle East, namely Saudi Arabia. So, when you're looking at reasons why the U.S. stock market has gone down so much since the beginning of the year, part of it is investors realizing we're not about to get an economic recovery and earnings stink. And the oil sector is going to hell in a handbasket. But there's another reason the U.S. stock market is going down. It's because the hundreds of billions of dollars, it's about $100 billion a month of Bush narco money coming from Afghanistan, filtering through Incirlik base in Turkey, Ramstein base in Germany, filtering through Saudi Arabia, Dubai, and all these other southern locations, $100 billion a month, and it's getting cut off by the Russian military. That is the other reason the U.S. stock market is going down. A cutoff of narco money. You're not going to read about this in the Wall Street Journal. They can't talk like this. They can't talk about what's really happening. No, they'll call it asset diversification. They'll call it a deeper analysis of price-earnings ratios. They'll talk about the cycle, going from bonds to stocks. We've had about 6 straight years of insane investing in the U.S. stock market with no hint of an economic recovery. And you even had Fisher of the Dallas Fed come out and say, you know, it's really about the Fed and the Wall Street banks keeping the stock market up. They're the big buyers. That's precisely against the Fed's contract. They're not supposed to buy stocks. But how else do you keep the U.S. public asleep? You make sure that their pension funds and their stock mutual funds are all doing well. Why is my sister asleep? Because her pension fund is doing well. Why will she wake up? Because it won't suddenly. And I'll tell her, sis, you've ignored me for 6 straight years. You call me an idiot. You say you sleep better not talking to me. Enjoy your lack of sleep.
Wow, man, that is pretty amazing. Well, all right, now look, I got to roll back.
Jeb Bush, by the way, Jeb Bush had a cutoff of his campaign donations through the narco channel. He doesn't raise much money on his own. He's a bumbling idiot. There was once a study done by a political science group. It was an estimation from a clever method of ex-presidents' IQ, their intelligence quotient. They concluded that based on speeches, private letters, drafted legislation, and other conversations on tape, what the level of intelligence was of the ex-president. And they concluded that Clinton was in the 150s and Papa Bush and his son were in the 80s. I think they're all dumb shits, John. All the Bushes are dumb shits, including Jeb. What did Jeb ever do as a governor except to suddenly at the 2000 presidential election improperly put as ineligible something like 100,000 black people because they had traffic violations It's improper because they weren't felonies. 100,000 black voters did not have a chance to vote Democrat, as is their custom. Thanks, Jeb. Mission accomplished, I guess. Isn't that the family motto? Oh, I tell you, it's sickening. It's all sickening. And, you know, my sister slept well for the last 6 years, but I have not. I think in the next few years I'm going to sleep better than her. She's going to go back into what I've been sleeping badly because I know it's coming. What concerns me most is the disruption of the inventory supply chain, because worldwide it's predominantly dollar-based. I'll give you a couple of examples. In Costa Rica here, we have a thriving agricultural sector. I mean, if you want to buy papaya, avocado, bananas, oranges, tangerines, lots of other things, guanabana and chayote and other delicious fruits and vegetables, it's mostly from the Costa Rican currency. They don't use the dollar. So provision of fruits and vegetables in Costa Rica will probably be just fine, including rice and beans. It's kind of funny. I've got a little side story. I meet some poor people once in a while. I say, why are you eating at McDonald's? Oh, because I now have a little bit of money. But McDonald's produces horse meat and ground bone that you call delicious. Oh, really? That's horrible. I said, why are you eating at McDonald's? And she said, because I have more money now. I said, yeah, but why don't you go out and get a good meal like a filet mignon or chicken cordon bleu? And she said, well, Americans eat hamburgers at McDonald's, so now that I have money, I want to eat good food too, like the Americans do.
Oh, dear.
And I said, but most of them are fat. 50 or 60% of them are obese. Oh, I didn't know that. I said, well, now you knew. You're eating ground up bone. Oh, but it says Angus. I said, well, it might be. It just might be. But, okay, the point is
it's Angus bone.
that fruit and vegetables, and coffee here, coffee, they got something called terrazzo, which means terrace brand coffee, terrace species of coffee, or strain of coffee. It's probably going to be okay. But the part that's going to be more difficult, with much more strain, is going to be like razor blades, heavy-duty cleansers, the stuff you buy in the United States that's imported here. So I try to stock up. I stock up on ground beans. They call it molida. Molida means mulled black beans. I love it. It's very good. It's high in protein. It's excellent. Very low in fat. So when they give up their rice and beans diet, they're going to a bad diet from a good diet. And it's really quite sad because they're trying to follow the American way. Now, I'm worried about the imported stuff like gasoline. There's no gasoline refinery in Costa Rica. I'm worried about tires. I'm worried about car parts. I think we're going to have some problems. I was just talking with a fellow who's very well informed about things. I said, what do you think is going to happen with the inventory supply chain? And he said, well, it could be 2 years before it gets straightened out, but you know, if countries get their act together, it might be just 6 months. 6 months of chaos.